How much technical difficulty is there with the programming? Like what programming language are we talking about? What
Oh,
was?
zero. I like maybe it was hard for us, but I mean we there was nothing. The only thing that was complex about Instagram at the beginning, technically, was making it scale. And we were just plain old Objective C for the client.
So it was iPhone only at first?
iPhone only. Yep.
As an Android person, I'm deeply offended, but go ahead.
Come
Yes.
on, this was 2010.
Oh, sure. Sorry,
Like
sorry.
Android's gotten a lot better,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
I take it back. You're right.
if I were to do something today, I think it would be very different in terms of launch strategy, right? Android's enormous too. But anyway, back to that moment, it was Objective C, and then we were Python based, which is just like this is before Python was really cool. Like now it's cool because it's all these machine learning libraries like support Python and right now it's super.
Yeah.
Now it's like cool to be Python. Back then it was like, oh, Google uses Python. Like maybe you should use Python. Facebook was PHP. Like I had worked at a small startup of some ex-Googlers that used Python, so we used it, and we used a framework called Django, which still exists and people use for basically the back end. And then we threw a couple interesting things in there. I mean, we used Postgres, which was kind of fun. It was a little bit like hipster database at the time, right?
Versus MySQL.
MySQL, like everyone used MySQL, so like using Postgres was like an interesting decision, right? But we used it because it had a bunch of geo features built in because we thought we were going to be a check-in app. Remember?
It's also super cool now. So you were into Python before it was cool, and you were into Postgres before it was cool.
Yeah,
Very
we were
nice.
basically like not only hipster photo company, hipster tech company, right? We also adopted Redis early and like loved it. I mean, it solved so many problems for us, and turns out that's still pretty cool. But the programming was very easy. It was like sign up a user, have a feed. There was no machine learning at all, zero.
Can you get some context? How many users at each of these stages? Are we talking about 100 users, 1,000 users?
So the stage I just described, I mean, that technical stack lasted through probably 50 million users. I mean, seriously, like you can get away with a lot with a pretty basic stack. Like I think a lot of startups try to over-engineer their solutions from the beginning to like really scale, and you can get away with a lot. That being said, most of the first 2 years of Instagram was literally just trying to make that stack scale, and it was not a Python problem. It was like literally just like where do we put the data? Like it's all coming in too fast. Like how do we store it? How do we make sure to be up? How do we make sure we're on the right size boxes, that they have enough memory? Those were the issues. But
can you speak to the choices you make at that stage when you're growing so quickly? Do you use something like somebody else's computer infrastructure, or do you build in-house?
I'm only laughing because when we launched, we had a single computer that we had rented in some colo space in LA. I don't even remember what it was called, because I thought that's what you did. When I worked at a company called Odeo that became Twitter, I remember visiting our space in San Francisco. You walked in, you had to wear the ear things. It was cold and fans everywhere, right? And we had to, plug one out, replace one, and I was the intern, so I just like held things. But I thought to myself, oh, this is how it goes. And then I remember being in a VC's office. I think it was Benchmark's office. And I think we ran into another entrepreneur and they were like, oh, how are things going? We're like, trying to scale this thing. And they were like, well, I mean, can't you just add more instances? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, instances on Amazon. I was like, what are those? And it was this moment where we realized how deep in it we were, because we had no idea that AWS existed, nor should we be using it. Anyway, that night we went back to the office and we got on AWS, but we did this really dumb thing where I'm so sorry to people listening, but we brought up an instance, which was our database. It's going to be a replacement for our database. But we had it talking over the public internet to our little box in LA that was our app server.
Very nice.
Yeah. That's how sophisticated we were. And obviously that was very, very slow. Didn't work at all. I mean, it worked, but didn't work. We only like later that night did we realize we had to have it all together. But at least like if you're listening right now and you're thinking, I have no chance. I'm going to start a startup. I have no chance. I don't know. We did it and we made a bunch of really dumb mistakes initially. I think the question is, how quickly do you learn that you're making a mistake, and do you do the right thing immediately right after?
So you didn't pay for those mistakes by failure. So how quickly did you fix it? I guess there's a lot of ways to sneak up to this question of how the hell do you scale the thing? Other startups, if you have an idea, how do you scale the thing? Is it just AWS and you try to write the kind of code that's easy to spread across a large number of instances, and then the rest is just put money into it?
Basically, I would say a couple things. First off, don't even ask the question. Just find product market fit, duct tape it together, right? Like if you have to. I think there's a big caveat here, which I want to get to. But generally, all that matters is product market fit. That's all that matters. If people like your product, do not worry about when 50,000 people use your product, because you will be happy that you have that problem when you get there. I actually can't name many startups where they go from nothing to something overnight and they can't figure out how to scale it. There are some, but I think nowadays when I say a solved problem, like there are ways of solving it. The base case is typically that startups worry way too much about scaling way too early and forget that they actually have to make something that people like. That's the default mistake case. But what I'll say is, once you start scaling, I mean, hiring quickly people who have seen the game before and just know how to do it, it becomes a bit of like, yeah, just throw instances of the problem, right?
Got it.
But the last thing I'll say on this that I think did save us, we were pretty rigorous about writing tests from the beginning. That helped us move very, very quickly when we wanted to rewrite parts of the product and know that we weren't breaking something else. Tests are one of those things where it's like you go slow to go fast, and they suck when you have to write them because you have to figure it out. And there are always those ones that break when you don't want them to break, and they're annoying, and it feels like you spent all this time. But looking back, I think that like long-term optimal, even with a team of 4, it allowed us to move very, very quickly because anyone could touch any part of the product and know that they weren't going to bring down the site, or at least in general.
At which point do you know product market fit? How many users would you say? Is it all it takes is like 10 people, or is it 1,000? Is it 50,000?
I don't think it is generally a question of absolute numbers. I think it's a question of cohorts, and I think it's a question of trends. So, it depends how big your business is trying to be, right? But if I were signing up 1,000 people a week and they all retain, like the retention curves for those cohorts looked good, healthy, and even like as you started getting more people on the service, maybe those earlier cohorts started curving up again because now there are network effects and their friends are on the service, or totally depends what type of business you're in, but I'm talking purely social, right? I don't think it's an absolute number. I think it is I guess you could call it a marginal number. So I spend a lot of time when I work with startups asking them like, okay, have you looked at that cohort versus this cohort, whether it's your clients or whether it's people signing up for the service? But a lot of people think you just have to hit some mark, like 10,000 people or 50,000 people. But really, 7-ish billion people in the world. Most people forever will not know about your product. There are always more people out there to sign up. It's just a question of how you turn on the spigot. So